Welcome to another Blender tutorial series. And in this series, I thought it would be best if we start way from the beginning and then move our way up. So we're starting from zero to you becoming a professional in Blender. In this episode, we are going to do our overall introduction to Blender. It could be very scary when you open Blender for the first time and you see all these panels and all these options around. But really, it gets very logical the more you work with Blender. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to break down everything that you're seeing here in the interface, and I'm going to dive into how you navigate the workspace. And finally, we're going to talk about object mode and edit mode and why we use the two and what they are. So sit back, relax, and let's get started. Right now I have Blender open. This is version 2.91 as indicated at the top right here. Please take note that at the bottom left of my screen I have an input overlay. Yes, I'm using OBS. And every time I push a keystroke, you will see them highlight right here. For example, there's my spacebar. Blender is all about shortcut keys, so it's a really good idea to take note of the shortcut keys I say in this video. They will become your go-to shortcut keys. So the first thing you're looking at here is what you see when you open Blender. And this is called the splash screen. You can always access this by clicking the Blender icon at the top left right up here and clicking splash screen. Sometimes you just want to do that in case you want to open a recent document. You can easily access it right here. Once you click though, the splash screen disappears. When we get rid of the splash screen, you are presented with a cube, a camera, and a light. This is the default Blender setup, and normally you would just delete this right off the bat. So let's go ahead and do that quickly. I'm going to push the A key, A, to select all, and then in Blender when you want to delete things, you push X, the X key. It'll ask you, do you want to delete? You can click it or you can just push enter. Now the default setup is gone. We have a blank workspace. Let's talk about what we're seeing here. This section right here in the middle is your scene, and you can navigate around the scene. We'll talk about navigation in a second. At the bottom, there is another window, and if I click and drag right where these two windows meet, you can extend this upwards. You can add other windows as well, but we're not going to get into that because it can actually go down a rabbit hole and you will have windows upon windows upon windows. So we're just going to keep it simple and stick with our scene up here and then this panel down here, which is called the timeline. We won't really use this today, so I'm just going to push this out of the way. On the right side here, there are two sections of panels. The top section shows you all the objects that you add to the scene. So I'm just going to quickly add an object to the scene. And as you can see, it appears here. I made a cube. The bottom panel here is where you spend a lot of time. Here you can do property settings, scene settings. You can add modifiers to this object that we have selected. You can do particle simulations, wind, smoke, fire. I mean, it's crazy. You can do so many things just down in this bottom section. So take note that you will use this section quite a lot. At the top of the Blender window, there are actually multiple preset workspaces that you can work in. Right now, we are in the base workspace. It's called Layout. Let's hop on over to another one just to show you what it looks like. Let's go to Shading. Here in the Shading workspace, you can apply shaders or a scene around your object. Let's go to Sculpting. Here in sculpting mode, you can have more tools on the left side here to sculpt on your object. I'll have a future video based on just how you enter the sculpting mode and how it works. But for now, this is just one of the other workspaces that you have. Let's go back to layout. So as I mentioned, this is your HQ, your base workspace that you will hop to, layout. Also at the top, right here at the left, we have some typical menu items. We have file. This is where you can save your document, open your document, import OBJ files into the document, export out if you want to like take your object into augmented reality, for example. Just the typical things that you have in any program. Edit You have preferences for Blender. If I click this and open it, you can change the preferences of Blender. I highly recommend you come in here and just explore the different things that you can set up. For example, what happens when you click the mouse? Do you want the cursor to look a certain way? Do you want to change the colors of Blender? Like right now, blue is my highlight color, but you can change that. Everything is customizable. And particularly add-ons. You can enable add-ons for Blender to enable you to do other things quickly. Some are already turned on by default, and to install other ones, you just either download it off the internet and click install here, or you activate the ones that are already preloaded into Blender. There are so many cool add-ons here that make your life easier, but just take note that they are turned off by default. At the top right of the scene here, there is a view sphere. And if I click and drag this sphere, I can rotate around the scene. Just like in any 3D program, we see 3D in X, Y, Z, 3 dimensions. If I click one of these, X, Y, and Z, I can go to an orthographic flat view. So I'm just hopping around from the side view, the front view, and then I can rotate again by clicking and dragging the whole sphere. You can also pan around if you hover over this little hand icon. You can pan around. I'm just clicking and dragging here. And you can swap the view from orthographic to perspective. Right above the scene cube, there are 4 little orbs. What these indicate are the different view modes that you can see your object. Let's try the first one. This is called Wireframe. And as you can see, we have gone into a wireframe mode. It's basically made your object look invisible so that you can see the edges and the vertices clearly. This becomes particularly useful when you want to select your object, but you want to select the back side of it. When we are in another view mode, it will only select what the camera is seeing, so sometimes it might not select the back of the object. That is when we go into wireframe mode. The next mode is the default mode in Blender. It's called Solid View, and that's what we were looking at when we turned on Blender. And it just shows your object without any materials, without lighting, just the object itself in a flat, solid color. The next view is what we call Look Dev or Viewport Shading. If I click this view, you can see that the cube has been lit up. Some sides of the cube look like they're in light, and some sides of the cube look like they're in shadow. Viewport shading just gives you a preview or a simple view of what you're designing, and this becomes particularly important when you are applying materials down here in this bottom right panel. You want to see what it looks like, but not necessarily use all the computational power of calculating lighting like in rendered mode. Let's go to rendered mode, the last option. When you come into this mode, this is where it calculates lighting that you have added to the scene, so that you get a realistic view of the materials that you've set for the cube and also how the light bounces around the scene. This takes more RAM from your computer, so depending on how complicated your scene is, it might slow down your computer. To demonstrate this, I'm just going to add a light to the scene, a point light, and we'll talk about how I'm moving these objects around in a future video. And as you can see, as I move this light, is casting light and reflection and shadow on this object. You can only see these lights and how the light behaves in this rendered view. So it's always a good idea to, once you finish doing a model, check it out. What does it look like in rendered view with your lighting? Let's increase the power of the light to get a better idea. And I'm just going to remove this. As mentioned before, I'm just going to push X and enter to delete that light, and I'm going to go back to my solid view mode. And this is how you simply navigate the view modes and the XYZ axes inside the scene. Take note that I am rotating very quickly without clicking the sphere by using the middle mouse button on my mouse. On the overlay, you can see that I'm clicking the middle mouse button and just rotating my mouse. And the last thing we're going to talk about today is the object mode versus edit mode, and why we would use these two modes. These two modes are different from the view modes we just discussed. This is mainly for editing an object itself, not how you're looking at the object or the lighting. So to demonstrate this, I'm going to select my cube here. You know you've got it selected when it has an orange outline. And currently, we are in solid view mode, but we are also in object mode. What is object mode? Object mode is used when you want to move an entire object on its own and treat it as its own object, like so. When I go into edit mode, which you can change from here to edit mode, you will notice that the cube is now displaying differently. It's highlighted first of all. I could deselect, but you can see these vertices at the corner, little points, and you can see this line as well going to another point. Basically, edit mode allows you to select vertices and move them. Or inside edit mode, we can choose edges by choosing the edge option right here. Let's grab this edge. I'm just clicking, left clicking, and I can move it this way. You can also choose faces of the object up here. Let's choose this face, and we can move the faces. So what it really comes down to is when you're inside the edit mode of an object, you can edit the object in a much more detailed way because you can select the vertices, the edges, and the faces, and move them around or scale them down as you please. When I come back out of edit mode to object mode, I can't do that. I can only move the object. So how I help the students understand this concept a little bit better is I explain that object mode is like a basket, and when you go into edit mode, you are editing inside the basket. So the data inside the basket are the vertices, the edges, and the faces. When we come back out to object mode, you are moving the entire basket, not the data inside. A quick way to go between object mode and edit mode is to push tab. So right here, I'm pushing tab, and I'm flipping between the two modes. And these are the two main modes you would use when you're constructing an object or constructing a 3D model. You would first add an object to the scene, such as a cube or a sphere or a cylinder, and then when it's selected, push tab, and you can further edit that cube or cylinder or sphere. Okay, that's the basic introduction to Blender. In this video, we've looked at the workspace and where everything is laid out. We've looked at how you can add add-ons and see the preferences of Blender using the rotational sphere here. And also we've looked at the different view modes for seeing your scene. And then we discussed object and edit mode and how we use these to edit a 3D object or just move it around and scale it down generally. In the next video, we're going to talk about moving objects, scaling objects, rotating objects that we have put in our scene. So that wraps up our introduction of Blender. Thanks for watching.